Still remember the exact temperature of the room the night my mother-in-law told me to pack my things. The furnace had kicked on early that October, and the kitchen was warm in that close, stuffy way old houses get when the radiators finally wake up. I was standing at the counter rinsing a wine glass, and I had just signed off on the property tax installment that morning. $1,240 pulled straight from my account to the city of Hamilton. When she walked in, folded her cardigan over a chair and said, very calmly, that it was time for me to find somewhere else to live. She said it the way you tell someone the milk had gone off. A little apologetic, a little firm, like she was doing me a kindness by getting it over with. My name is Tessa. I was 31 that fall, and I had been quietly paying for almost everything in that house for 2.5 years. Let me back up, because if I just tell you the ending, you'll think I'm exaggerating, and I'm not. I've gone over it enough times in my head that I could recite the bank statements like a prayer. I met my husband at a friend's cottage up near Bracebridge the summer I turned 26. He was charming in the way that men who have never had to try very hard are charming. Easy laugh, good with the barbecue, told a story like he'd rehearsed it. I fell for him fast. We got married 18 months later in a small ceremony, and his mother cried through the whole thing and told me, holding both my hands, that she'd always wanted a second daughter. I believed her. That's the part that still embarrasses me. I genuinely believed her. We moved into his mother's house in the East End because, the way it was explained to me, it just made sense. Why throw money away on rent in his market when there was a whole second floor sitting empty? His grandfather had bought the house in the 70s. It was paid off, no mortgage, and his mother lived there alone after his father passed. We'd save up, the plan went, and buy our own place in a year or two. I want to be honest about this, because the comments people make in their heads when they hear a story like mine usually start with, why didn't you just get your own place? The answer is that I wanted to. I brought it up constantly. And every single time, there was a reason it wasn't the right moment. His mother's knee surgery, his sister's separation, the roof needing work, the market being too hot, then too uncertain, then too hot again. Looking back, I can see the reasons were never going to run out. At the time, each one sounded reasonable on its own. Here's the thing nobody knew, and the thing that makes the comment section light up every time I tell a version of this. I was the one with the money. Not flashy money. I'm a financial analyst. I do risk modeling for a mid-sized insurance company, the kind of job nobody at a party wants to hear about. And I'm good at it. I was making a little over $140,000 a year by then, with bonuses. My husband, on the other hand, had been between things for most of our marriage. He'd been a regional sales rep, then he got let go in a restructuring about 6 months after the wedding, and he just never really went back. There were always interviews coming up, consulting opportunities, a buddy who was going to bring him in on something. None of it materialized, and after a while I stopped asking, because asking made him sullen for days and it wasn't worth the cold shoulder. So I paid. And here's the part that answers the question everyone asks. The how did nobody know question. They didn't know because I deliberately made it invisible, and because nobody in that house ever wanted to look too closely at where the money came from. Early on, my husband's pride couldn't handle the idea of his wife covering the bills. So we set up a joint account. His name was on it. The hydro, the gas, the property taxes, the home insurance, the internet, the groceries, the 2 cars, all of it came out of that joint account by automatic withdrawal. And every month, quietly, from my own account, I transferred whatever was needed to keep it from going negative. On paper, to anyone glancing at it, the household ran on our money. In reality, it ran on mine. He never checked the balance. Why would he? It was always full. I added it up properly only once, about a year in, sitting at my desk at work during a slow afternoon. Mortgage there wasn't, thank God, but everything else came to somewhere around $7,400 a month. Once you counted the cars, the food for a household of 4, the utilities, the insurance, his mother's prescriptions that weren't covered, the property taxes spread out, the constant little repairs. I stared at the number for a long time. 7,400. 80-some thousand a year, flowing out of me into a house that wasn't mine, that I'd never own a square inch of, while I was told to be grateful I had a roof over my head. I didn't say anything. That's my great flaw, if you want to call it that. I'm a person who keeps their receipts and stays quiet. I told myself it was partnership. Marriage means you carry the load when your partner can't, right? That's what I'd watched my own parents do. I told myself it was temporary, that the second we bought our own place, this would all reset. What I didn't understand, not until that October night, was that to them I had stopped being a person sometime in the second year. I had become a utility. Like the furnace. You don't thank the furnace. You just expect it to run, and you only think about it when it stops. The first crack came at Thanksgiving, a few weeks before the night I'm building toward. My sister-in-law and her husband were over, his mother's older daughter, and she'd recently gotten back together with her own husband after their separation. They were sitting in a living room I'd repainted with my own money, on the sectional I'd bought when the old couch finally gave out. And my sister-in-law was talking about how she and her husband were ready to really settle down and start trying. Her words, and his mother reached over and patted her hand and said this house had so much room, and wouldn't it be wonderful to have a baby in it again. I was carrying the turkey to the table when she said it, and I remember the platter felt very heavy all of a sudden. Nobody looked at me, not one of them looked at me, and I understood, in the way you understand things in your body before your brain catches up, that a decision had already been made in a conversation I hadn't been part of. I set the turkey down. I smiled. I asked who wanted dark meat. That's what I do. 2 weeks later, she made it official in the kitchen with her cardigan folded over the chair. You'll want to start looking for a place, she said. My daughter and her husband are ready to start their family, and they'll need the space up there. You understand. You two don't even have children, so really it's just practical. It's the sensible thing. I waited for my husband to say something. He was at the table scrolling on his phone, and he didn't even put it down. He just sort of half nodded, like she was talking about rearranging the garage. And where are we supposed to go? I said, not angry. Genuinely curious what story they'd built in their heads. His mother smiled at me with what she clearly thought was warmth. Well, you'll figure something out. You're a smart girl. Maybe a little apartment for a while. It'll be good for you two to have your own space. You two. As if he was coming. As if there was any version of this where he packed a box. I looked at my husband. Are you leaving with me? He finally looked up, and the look on his face was the thing that ended it for me, more than anything his mother said. It wasn't cruelty. It would have been easier if it was cruelty. It was confusion. Mild irritation, like I'd asked him to do something tedious. I mean, he said, Mom needs help around here. With the new baby coming and everything, we'll figure it out. Don't make it a whole thing. Don't make it a whole thing. Something in me went very quiet and very clear. People always describe rage as hot. This wasn't hot. It was cold and it was orderly. Like a spreadsheet opening in my mind. I felt the switch flip, and I want to be precise about what flipped, because it matters. It wasn't, I'll show them, it was, I'm done carrying this. Two completely different feelings that happened to look the same from the outside. I said, okay. Just that. Okay. His mother beamed. I knew you'd be reasonable. There's no rush, sweetheart. Take a month or two. I went upstairs and I folded the laundry that was sitting in the basket, because the laundry doesn't fold itself and old habits don't die just because your marriage does. And while I matched his socks, I made a list in my head, the way I do at work when a portfolio's gone sideways and you have to triage. First thing in the morning, I thought. First thing. I barely slept. He slept like a baby beside me, and I lay there listening to the furnace cycle on and off doing math. The next morning I made coffee. I waited until he left for one of his meetings that I was fairly sure was just the gym and a long lunch, and I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop and my phone, and I started. First, I called a moving company. A real one, not two guys in a truck. Full pack, full service, available that week. I booked them for 2 days later. The deposit went on my card without a flicker. Then I opened my banking and I did the thing I should have done 2 years earlier. I went into the joint account, the one that ran the whole house, and I canceled every automatic withdrawal that was tied to me. Then I stopped my monthly transfer into it. I didn't drain the account. I want to be clear. I'm not a thief, and I had no interest in being one. I left the balance exactly as it was. I just turned off the tap that had been filling it. Going forward, that account would run dry the way any account runs dry, when money stops going in and money keeps going out. Then I made a folder, a real physical folder, because I'd learned in my work that paper makes things feel real to people in a way that a screen never does. Every transfer, every bill, every property tax installment with the city logo right there, the car payments, the insurance, 2.5 years of it, printed at the library down the street because I didn't want it on the home printer. By the time I was done, it was almost a centimeter thick. I'm going to tell you the part that even my own lawyer didn't see coming, because it's the part that turned this from a sad story into a different kind of story. But I have to walk you to it. 2 days later, the movers came. I'd told no one. My husband was again out. His mother was at her bridge afternoon at the community center, the one I paid the membership for. My sister-in-law wasn't there. The house was empty, except for me and 4 very efficient strangers in matching shirts. I want you to understand what it felt like to watch them work. I'd spent 2.5 years making myself small in that house, walking quietly, saying yes, carrying the platter. And now there were people moving through it fast and loud. And every single thing they wrapped in paper and carried out the front door was something I had paid for with my own money. The sectional, the dining table and chairs, the good knives, the flat screen I'd bought him for Christmas the year he got let go. To cheer him up, the washer and dryer, which I'd replaced 18 months ago when the old ones died, and which were, legally, mine, with my name on the receipt and the extended warranty. The patio set, the snowblower, which in this country is not a small thing. The artwork, the lamps, I'd kept every receipt. I keep everything. It's a personality flaw that turned out to be a superpower. I left his mother's things. Her furniture from before, her china, her photographs, the recliner that had been her late husband's. I'm not a monster. I left the house with everything that had been theirs before me, and I took everything that had been mine. The difference, it turned out, was almost the entire house. Around 2 in the afternoon, while the truck was half full, my phone buzzed. My husband, Mom said we should sit down tonight and figure out timelines for you moving out. No pressure. Maybe order in. I looked around the half-empty living room, at the rectangle of cleaner paint where the TV had been, and I typed back one word. Sure. He had no idea the conversation was already over. He thought he was still scheduling it. He came home around 4. I heard his key, heard the door, heard him stop. There's a particular silence a man makes when he walks into a room that's wrong, and his brain refuses to process it. I was upstairs taping the last box of my own clothes. I heard his footsteps come halfway up the stairs and stop. Tessa. Then louder. Tessa, what the hell is going on? I came out onto the landing. I'd thought I'd feel something dramatic at this moment, and I didn't. I just felt tired and very, very calm. I'm moving out, I said. Like everyone wanted. He laughed, that sharp, disbelieving laugh. This isn't, Mom said you had a month. Why is the couch gone? Why is the TV gone? Because I bought them. He came up the rest of the stairs. Okay, you're being insane. You can't just take everything. I'm taking what's mine. I left everything that was your mother's. You can check the receipts if you want, I've got them all. I gestured at the folder sitting on top of a box. I made you a copy. His face did something I'd never seen it do. He looked, for the first time in years, like a man who was paying attention. What is that? It's everything I've paid for since we got married. The hydro, the gas, the property taxes, the cars, the groceries, your mother's prescriptions, the insurance, the repairs, all of it. I kept my voice flat, almost gentle. Roughly 7,400 a month. For 2.5 years. I just turned it all off this morning. I watched it land. I watched him do the math, or try to, watched the color drain out of his face the way water drains out of a sink. What do you mean you turned it off? I mean the joint account isn't getting topped up anymore. I mean I canceled the withdrawals that were coming from me. I mean as of this morning, the only money keeping this house running is whatever's in there right now, and whatever you and your mother and your sister can put into it. I picked up the box, which, as far as I can tell, is nothing. Because none of you have a steady income. I was the income. I was the furnace. You can't do this, he said. You can't just leave. You all told me to, I said. I'm doing exactly what I was told. I'm being reasonable. I'm being sensible. I used her words back at him and watched them hit. His mother got home while the movers were carrying out the dining table. I heard her car in the driveway, heard her come through the door, heard the exact moment she walked into the stripped living room, and her voice died in her throat. "What is this?" she said. "What is happening to my house?" I came down the stairs with the last box. "I'm moving out," I said. "You wanted the space for your daughter. I'm making space." Her eyes went to the movers carrying her. "No, my dining table out the front door." And her face went sharp. "Stop. Stop. Those are mine. You can't take my things." "They're not yours," I said. I held out the folder. "I bought everything that's leaving. Every receipt is in here. Your furniture, your mother's china, your husband's recliner. All of that is staying. It's still here. Go look." She didn't take the folder. She stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "You do this to family? After everything we've done for you? Giving you a home?" And there it was. The thing I'd swallowed for 2.5 years, finally said out loud. "Giving me a home." I almost laughed. "You gave me a home," I repeated. "I paid for that home. I paid your hydro and your property taxes and your insurance and your groceries and the pills you take every night. You didn't give me anything. I paid rent in a house I'll never own, and the rent was everything I had. And the payment was being told to leave so your other daughter could have my room." I picked up the box. "I stopped paying this morning. The withdrawals are canceled. You've got about 3 or 4 weeks before the first bill bounces. I'd start figuring out the property taxes if I were you. The next installment's in December." She turned to my husband. "Are you going to let her do this?" He didn't say anything. He stood in the middle of his stripped-down living room with my centimeter-thick folder of receipts in his hands, and he didn't say a single word, and I think that silence told her more than any explanation could have. She finally understood that he hadn't known either, that the man she'd raised had been living on his wife's money for 2.5 years and had been too proud and too lazy to ever once look at where it came from. My sister-in-law showed up about 20 minutes later, called by someone in a panic. She walked in, looked at the empty room, and laughed nervously. "Is this a joke? Why is the house empty? I thought we were getting the upstairs." "You're getting the whole place," I said, carrying my last box past her toward the door. "Congratulations. It's all yours now. The bills come to about 7,400 a month. Good luck." She looked at her mother. She looked at her brother. She looked at the bare walls. And I watched her understand, slowly, what she'd actually asked for. I drove to a hotel out by the airport that night, one of those clean, anonymous ones with the breakfast buffet and the pool nobody uses, and I checked in for a week. I sat on the bed with the containers of pas de I'd picked up on the way, and I didn't even really eat it. I just spread everything out around me, the folder, my laptop, my phone, which had started buzzing and didn't stop. And for the first time in 2.5 years, I felt the muscles in my shoulders come down from around my ears. He called 11 times that night. I didn't answer. Around midnight, he switched to texting. Mom is really upset. You're being so dramatic. This is gonna hurt everyone. Just come home and we'll talk. I read them all and answered none. In the morning, I called my own lawyer, a woman a colleague had recommended for something completely unrelated a year before. I laid it all out for her, the whole thing. The joint account, the receipts, the 2.5 years. And she was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that changed the entire shape of what happened next. The renovations, she said. You said you paid for renovations. The roof, the new furnace, the kitchen. Were any of those done in your name? Permits, contractor agreements, anything? I thought about it. And slowly, it came back to me. About a year and a half earlier, we'd done a major kitchen renovation and the furnace replacement. Close to $40,000 all in. My husband's mother had been worried about the cost showing up against her income. Something about a tax credit she was claiming and not wanting to mess with her benefits. And she'd said casually, "Why don't you just put it in your name, dear? You're the one paying anyway." So I had the kind director agreements, the permits with the city, the warranties, the financing I'd paid off in cash, all of it in my name. I thought nothing of it at the time. It was just paperwork. My lawyer was quiet again. Then she said, "Tessa, I'm going to need you to send me all of that. Because depending on how those agreements were structured, and depending on the value those improvements added to a property you've been contributing to for years, you may have a legal interest in that house that's a lot more than sentimental." I won't pretend I understood the law that day. I didn't, but I understood enough to know that the woman who told me I was being given a home had, with one casual suggestion about a tax credit, handed me a claim against the very house she was throwing me out of. The unraveling happened faster than I expected, and slower than the movies would have you believe. Real life has a timeline. The first thing to go was the internet and the cable, because those were monthly and the payment bounced within the first 2 weeks. Then the cell phone plan I'd been carrying for all of us gone, which meant my husband had to scramble to get himself a new line. Then, at the end of the month, the hydro bill came due and there was no money in the account to cover it, and Hamilton in November is not a place you want to be playing chicken with your heating. The gas bill too. The car insurance lapsed on the vehicle that was registered to the joint account, which meant my sister-in-law's husband suddenly couldn't legally drive the car he'd been borrowing. And the property taxes. That was the big one. The December installment came due. 1,200 of $40, the same number I'd paid the very morning all this started. And there was nobody to pay it. The city of Hamilton does not care about your family drama. They add interest. And then, they keep adding it. My husband came to the hotel on the 4th day. I almost didn't recognize him. He looked deflated, smaller, in a wrinkled shirt, and the anger was gone, replaced by something close to panic. "You have to come back," he said in the lobby, not even sitting down. "Mom can't sleep. The house is falling apart. The internet's gone. The heat's gonna get shut off. My sister's freaking out. You're punishing everyone." I'd thought about what I'd say to this moment. "I'm not punishing anyone," I said. "I stopped paying for a household that decided I didn't belong in it. That's not punishment. That's just what happens when the person paying the bills leaves. You all told me to leave. I'm just not paying for the privilege of being thrown out." "Mom said we can work something out," he said. "If you come back, we can talk about putting your name on something or some kind of arrangement." I almost laughed at that, because it told me his mother had finally understood the part about the renovations, or her own lawyer had. "My name is already on something," I said quietly. "Did she tell you that part? About the kitchen and the furnace? About the tax credit?" He stared at me. He had no idea what I was talking about. Of course he didn't. I slid an envelope across the little lobby table. It was a letter from my lawyer. Polite, professional, no insults. It laid out my documented contributions. It referenced the improvements made and held in my name, and offered them a choice: reimbursement of a specified amount, or my lawyer would file a claim asserting a beneficial interest in the property, which would mean the courts, which would mean a forced accounting of everything, which would very likely mean the house would have to be sold to pay me out. His hands shook a little as he read it. "You planned this," he whispered. "No," I said, and I meant it. "You planned it. At Thanksgiving. In whatever conversation you all had about my room. I just did the paperwork." I stood up, and he didn't try to stop me this time. As I walked to the elevator, my phone buzzed, and it wasn't him. It was his mother. The message wasn't sweet anymore. No sweetheart, no dear. It just said, "You are tearing this family apart and you will regret it." I read it in the elevator and I felt, honestly, nothing. You can't tear apart something that was never holding you in the first place. The negotiation took about 3 months. I'll spare you the legal back and forth because it's tedious, and it's the same in every story like this. Their first lawyer told them I had no case. My lawyer sent over the documentation. Their lawyer called my lawyer back rather more quietly. Because here's what they hadn't understood: the renovations weren't a gift. They were investments I'd made, documented, in my name, in a property I'd been pouring money into for years, with a paper trail thick enough to print at the library. A judge looks at that and doesn't see a sweet daughter-in-law who should be grateful. A judge sees a creditor. In the end, they didn't have the money to pay me out. Of course they didn't. They'd never had the money. That was the whole point. So the house, the one that had been in the family since the 70s, the one I was told I should be grateful to live in, was sold the following spring. It went quickly. It was a good house in a good market. Even after the property taxes and the lapsed, everything got squared away. My share, the documented contributions and the value of the improvements held in my name, came to a number I'm not going to say out loud. But it was enough. It was more than enough. It was, almost to the dollar, what I put into that house over 2.5 years, which felt less like winning and more like simply getting my own money back from people who'd convinced me it was theirs. My sister-in-law and her husband didn't get their family home. They rent a townhouse in Stony Creek now. My husband's mother moved into a senior's apartment, a 1-bedroom, and from what I hear, she tells the story very differently than I do. In her version, I'm the villain who destroyed a family. I've made my peace with that. Villain in someone else's story, hero in your own. I read that somewhere, and it stuck. And my husband. The divorce was the cleanest part of the whole thing, which surprised me. There wasn't much to fight over, because everything had already been counted in my centimeter-thick folder, long before the lawyers got involved. He moved in with a friend for a while. He sent me a message a few weeks after it was final. I didn't think it would end like this. I looked at that for a long time, and I wrote back the only true thing I had left to say to him. You didn't think at all. That was the problem. Then I blocked the number, and that was the last I heard from any of them. People ask me sometimes if I regret it, if I feel guilty about the house, about his mother and her little apartment, about how it all came down. And I want to be honest, because the honest answer is more complicated than the satisfying one. I don't regret leaving. I don't regret stopping the payments, or the folder, or the lawyer, or any of the practical things, because all I did was stop subsidizing people who decided I was disposable. And there is no law of the universe that says you have to keep paying for a seat at a table where they've already written you out of the meal. What I regret is the 2.5 years before. The platters I carried. The reasons I accepted. The nights I lay awake doing math and then said, okay, in the morning. I regret how long it took me to understand that being needed and being valued are not the same thing. That you can be the most important person in a house and still be invisible in it, and that the people who tell you you're family while they spend your money are the ones you have to watch the closest. I have my own place now. A condo, downtown, small, with a view of the harbor and a balcony just big enough for 2 chairs. Everything in it I chose. Everything in it I paid for, gladly, because it's mine. And there's no one upstairs deciding when my time is up. I pay my property taxes the first week they're due. And I don't feel that old heaviness anymore. The platter feeling, the furnace feeling. I just feel like a person paying for her own life. The night I moved in, I sat out on that little balcony with a glass of wine, and I watched the lights come up across the water. And I thought about that warm, stuffy kitchen and the cardigan folded over the chair and the word sensible. And I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was just, finally, quiet in the good way. Not the small quiet I'd learned in that house, the one where you swallow things to keep the peace. A different quiet, the kind where you can hear the furnace tick on, the kind where so's is, the kind where you can hear the furnace tick on, the kind where you can furnace tits, is use yours. For a long time, I thought the worst thing I'd done in that marriage was leave. It took me a while to understand the worst thing was staying. As long as I did, and paying for the privilege of being treated like furniture. Nothing that happened to that family afterward was a punishment I handed out. It was just arithmetic finally catching up to them. You cannot run a household on one person's income, decide that person is disposable, throw her out, and expect the lights to stay on. The hydro got shut off because nobody had ever paid it but me. The house got sold because the money that held it up had a name, and the name was mine. Cause and effect. I didn't curse anyone. I just stopped subsidizing people who'd already written me out of the room. What I keep coming back to, though, isn't the folder of receipts or the lawyer's letter. It's the part of me that almost didn't act. For 2.5 years, I knew the math, and I stayed quiet because I confused being needed with being loved. And I told myself that swallowing things was the decent way to keep the peace. I want to be careful here because being decent matters to me, it always has. But there's a difference between being a good person and being a doormat, and I'd let my own sense of fairness get used against me. The day I finally drew a line, I wasn't becoming a worse person. I was becoming an honest one. Treating yourself like you matter isn't cruelty. It's just telling the truth out loud. The thing that actually saved me wasn't anger either. Anger felt good for about a night. What got me out clean was that I'd kept the receipts, that I knew how a joint account works and how a property claim works, that I called a lawyer instead of slamming a door. I'd spent years being good at my job and small in my home, and the night it ended, I finally let the clear-headed version of me run the whole show. Knowing things and using what you know calmly is its own kind of protection. Nobody can gaslight a spreadsheet. And then there was the part nobody saw. The part where I sat in a hotel room out by the airport with cold pad thai and a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing, and I just kept going. Made the calls. Sent the documents. Didn't go back when they begged. Didn't cave when my mother-in-law called me a family wrecker. That stubbornness, that refusal to quit halfway, was the muscle I didn't know I had until I needed it. If there's anything I'd want someone to take from my story, it's this. Stay kind, but never confuse kindness with silence. Keep your head clear enough to see what's really happening to you. And when you finally decide to walk, have the spine to walk all the way out. I wasn't pushed out of that house. In the end, I think I let myself out.